And then I've got Jasmine.
Hi everyone, I'm Councillor Jasmine Ali and I'm the Cabinet Member for Children's Schools and Adult Care. Good afternoon.
Richard.
Hello, I'm Councillor Richard Livingstone. I'm the Cabinet Member for the Environment, Transport and the Climate Emergency.
Vicky.
Councillor Vicky Mills. Councillor Vicky Mills, Cabinet Member for Finance, Performance and Brexit.
Leo. Have we got Leo? Let's go with he might be on his way. Johnson.
Hello, good afternoon. Councillor Johnson Situ, Cabinet Member for Growth, Development and Planning.
And then finally Kieran.
Hello, Councillor Kieran Williams, Cabinet Member for Housing Management and Modernisation.
Perfect. And we've had apologies from Councillor Cryan. I'm presuming apologies for lateness from Councillor Pollock and the same for Councillor John as well. But we also should have both Eleanor Kelly, the Chief Executive, and Doreen Forrester-Brown, our Director of Law and Democracy. And then we've obviously got a number of other officers who will be joining us depending on what items we are going through this afternoon. So before we start, there's just a couple of announcements that I need to make. So if members can't hear the proceedings any longer, can you please let me know, kind of flag it to me in the chat box or drop me a text and we will make sure that we can get you back online. In terms of microphones, all the microphones are muted by default during the meeting and you should be unmuted when you're called on to speak, but if that doesn't happen, do just unmute yourselves, but then remute once you have finished speaking. And obviously you will have noticed that this meeting is being recorded, and so it's going to be uploaded straight to the Council's YouTube channel after the meeting. So we're going to move straight into the agenda. So in terms of apologies, as I said, we've got apologies from Councillor Cryan and then apologies for lateness for Councillor Pollock and for Councillor John. In terms of urgent items, there are two that are on the agenda, which will come at the end of proceedings today. So first, the leisure management contract, so the post-COVID-19 review and management arrangements, and then our policy and resources strategy for the financial remit for 2021-22 and scene setting. I have no items for closed business today, just the minutes from our previous meeting to be agreed at the end of this meeting. Are there any disclosable pecuniary interests or dispensations that we need to know about? No? Oh, Johnson?
Just in the, for full transparency, I chair Creation Trust, which, whilst is not directly named in the Aylesbury report, is very active in the Aylesbury, on the Aylesbury.
Perfect, thank you. There aren't any public questions today, and then we just need to approve the minutes from the meeting held on the 16th of June 2020. Can we approve those?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. In which case we can move straight into our deputations. So we've got one deputation request today from Southwark Cyclists, which is in respect of item 14, so Southwark Street Space Plan. So I think we should have Jacob, Emily, Jeremy and Izzy on the line, and I think Jacob, you're the spokesperson who's going to address the meeting, so you've got 5 minutes to do so, and then at the end of that we will take questions from cabinet members if that works. So Jacob, I'm going to hand over to you, or however you're going to split it between all of you.
All right, great, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity for us to make this deputation. My name is Jacob Mamchuk. I'm coordinator of Southwark Cyclists. I'm here with colleagues from Mums for Lungs and Living Streets. We have all been working with Southwark during the lockdown and strongly support the schemes that have been introduced to date by the cabinet member and highways and transport planning officers. We support in particular the school streets at Comber Grove, Rye Oak and Camelot primary schools, which have gone far further than almost any other scheme in London to affect permanent local change. Also, the focus on Rye Lane of walking and cycling, the creation of a safe, protected cycle route between Elephant and Castle and Southwark Bridge, and finally the neighborhood schemes in East Dulwich, Dulwich Village, and Walworth. With public transportation capacity reduced across the city and with private car vehicle usage returning swiftly, there is an urgent need to ensure streets in Southwark are safe and attractive for all to use, and to enable people to access parks, shops, and other
Jacob,
vital.
I think people are struggling to hear you. I don't know whether you can move closer to your microphone at all and just see if that's better.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. I think
Do you want to start again? That's probably easiest, and then we'll make sure you got it.
Sorry about that. Sure. So first, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak at this deputation. My name is Jacob Mumchak, coordinator of Southwark Cyclists, and I'm here with colleagues from Mums for Lungs and Living Streets. We have all been working with Southwark during the lockdown to strongly support the schemes that have been introduced to date by a cabinet member and highways and transport planning officers. We support in particular the school streets at Comber Grove, Rye Oak, and Camelot primary schools, which have gone far further than almost any other schemes in London to affect permanent local change. Additionally, the focus on Rye Lane of walking and cycling, the creation of the safe protected cycle route between Elephant and Castle and Southwark Ridge, and finally the neighborhood schemes in East Dulwich, Dulwich Village, and Walworth. With public transport capacity reduced across the city and with private car usage returning swiftly, there is an urgent need to ensure streets in Southwark are safe and attractive for all to use, to enable people to access parks, shops, and other vital services. What is being proposed in the Southwark Streets Plan is entirely in line with Department for Transport and TfL guidance. In summary, this is first, to create a safe, protected cycling network. Second, to facilitate walked and cycle journeys toward town centers and key amenities such as hospitals and schools. And third, to create attractive and pleasant local neighborhoods by removing through traffic. This has particularly large benefits for children and their chances to be active. According to TfL, if every car-owning household in Southwark switched their trips from public transport to driving, traffic on our streets would increase by 76%, causing chaos and gridlock. And this does not take into account residents of other boroughs driving through Southwark. And just this week, another study has found that air pollution worsens COVID-19, leading to increased hospital admissions, infections, and mortality. The need to deliver this plan is both urgent and vital. There's a risk of a tide of traffic unless there's fast, bold action. There's a strong fit between the street space plan and other strategies that are being discussed at this meeting, the climate change strategy and the air quality plan. Together, all aim to reduce the impact of general traffic and support active journeys, whether walking, cycling, or using public transport. Together, they would form a clear and joined-up program to address a number of long-standing issues in the borough around air quality, public health, road danger, climate change and well-being, and community coherence. Key too is how these strategies also address issues of social justice. It is well known that those who are less affluent are far less likely to own a vehicle and are more likely to experience worse air quality and greater road danger. Exacerbated, this is the impact that COVID-19 has had on those who have lower incomes and those who are from a Black and minority ethnic background, who make up 46% of Southwark residents and who are experiencing double the mortality rate from COVID-19 compared to white British people. In addition to our support, we would like to suggest some areas we feel Southwark can go even further. Implementing low traffic neighborhoods such as those proposed in Walworth in a strategic way across the areas of highest need in the borough. Initially, this would be in Camberwell, Peckham, Old Kent Road, and Bermondsey. Low traffic neighborhoods should be delivered in conjunction with planned strategies to reduce traffic on adjacent main roads and boundary roads. This is examined in detail in the air quality report. In the next phase of plans, we would like to see mitigation measures being developed for the Walworth Road to reduce returning levels of general traffic while supporting local business. We'd also propose that on John Ruskin Street, the long-term problems and that residents have raised are addressed. These are focused around rat running, HTVs, as well as vehicle speeds and associated air quality. Similar approaches should be taken in Dulwich. Implement a safe cycling network. Most people, and especially families with children, will not cycle because they do not feel safe doing so, mixing with traffic. In 2015, Southwark released a bold cycling strategy, which is the framework for this network. Low traffic neighborhoods should connect with protected cycle routes on main roads. This will enable a far more diverse range of people to cycle in large numbers. Provide more space for people on our high street. This needs to be done with accessibility in mind and can include pavement widening, creating space for restaurants to provide outdoor seating, and where possible, filtering high streets or motor traffic, as has been done in Rye Lane. In addition to the changes around Borough High Street, we would like to see further change on TfL managed roads in favor of people on foot in inner town centers, especially in Peckham and Camberwell. We'd like to see cycling infrastructure and work to reduce the impact of traffic and road capacity along the A202, New Kent Road, and Old Kent Road. There's a tremendous opportunity for sustainable freight in Southwark to reduce the number of driven delivery and freight journeys. Again, the approach is as to how to maximize this opportunity is outlined in the air quality strategy and fits with regeneration programs across the borough. Finally, we would like to stress that these schemes take real political will and that Southwark is to be admired for its progress to date. There will be opposition, there will be objections, but in TfL's mid-June funding announcement of 195 schemes across London, there were 77 low-traffic neighborhoods funded across 14 boroughs. The public health and social justice upsides of this program are huge, and as Waltham Forest has shown over many years, once these schemes bed in, they're extremely popular and successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Can I know there are a number of kind of specific questions and suggestions in there that Richard, you might want to come back on, but are there any questions for the deputation first from other cabinet members? No, in which case, Richard, do you want to start and come back and see if that prompts any more questions?
Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you, Jacob, for coming along to give the deputation today. I think that helps set the scene very well for the street space item that's coming up later on the agenda. And thank you for the recognition for the work that the council's doing. It is at times challenging, and I know many councillors listening into this meeting will have faced some of the challenges around that, but I think it is the right thing to be doing in the context that we're working with at the moment, not least with the COVID emergency. Just on the specific issues that you talked about, I'm not going to cover them all in detail now, but the approach that we're taking on street space is very much one of being a staged approach. So the decisions we've made already and the further decisions that we're flagging up in the report today certainly are not the be all and end all of what we're going to try to do. And we'll certainly want to explore those ideas, many of which have already been submitted to the council through the commonplace map that we put up on the council's website, which has enabled us to try and gauge, well, for our highways officers to understand what proposals are and to gauge the sort of level of support there might be for those. So those are all certainly things that we would want to look at further. We certainly know that we need to make those further steps around the low traffic neighbourhood work that we've already announced to make those things work. We've listened in the case of Walworth in a few places where we need to change things slightly, and we'll continue to adapt those things and the points on Walworth Road and the places that we've yet to do, or where perhaps we need to do more of this work, such as Camwell, Peckham, Bermondsey and Old Kent Road, I think are well made. So thank you very much for those, and we'll certainly continue the conversations with TfL about seeing how that they can play a role, because there are some bits on some of the major road network which are outside of our control directly, but if we can get TfL to make some changes in a few locations at least, that will have a significant impact. And I think particularly around Camberwell Green is somewhere where I think conversations with TfL could help improve things.
Perfect. Thanks, Richard. I've had no one else indicate, but thank you very much for your deputation, Jacob, and others. And I hope that you're going to stay around until we get to the streetscape item so that you can hear more of that discussion later. In which case we'll move on to the next item, so item 8, so the council's relationship with housing associations and the recommendations of the Housing Scrutiny Commission. I saw Councillor Edwards, who is the chair of the commission, a minute ago on my screen. So I'm going to hand over to you, Gav, just to draw our attention to any of the particular highlights from the report that you want to, and then we'll move on to questions.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. Can people hear me okay? Just checking. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but just to explain some of the background of this, these recommendations came out of a session that we had at the Housing Scrutiny Commission with residents from Clarkson House, who are residents of a housing association called Wandle, and they had been having some serious systemic long-term problems with their landlord over a long period of time. And it was clear that the council had very little influence or ability in order to change that situation for residents of our borough. And you know, we've got in this borough clearly a big influence over people living in council housing. We've got some influence over people living in private rented housing as well, and the environments of other people. But I think most councillors would recognise, struggled to have influence over residents of housing association properties, and sometimes, sadly, the landlords, housing associations, do not behave well towards the people living in their properties, as we found out with regard to Glaston House. So the three recommendations, mainly about the possibility of having a service level agreement with the housing associations with whom we partner, the possibility of an arbitration panel where there are serious complaints, and also making sure that we work with the housing regulator, which is the body that regulates housing associations. And just taking those steps may help us as a council to improve the lives of people who are living in housing association properties but are experiencing problems at the moment. So that's the thrust and the background of where we're coming from, and clearly, you know, in the fullness of time, it'd be good to get a response from Cabinet on that. That's all I wanted to say.
Great, thank you very much. Do Cabinet members have any questions or any comments, or anyone want to come back on anything that Gavin has said? Kieran, I'm looking to you first.
Yes, just to say thank you to Gavin and the committee for the Commission for doing the work on this. I think there's some really practical recommendations here that we should look at. As you say, as a council, we have limited powers over housing associations where they're doing things that are really they shouldn't be. But we do have some, and we do have some soft power as well. And I think it's just a really helpful guide to the things we could look at to do more of. One thing I'd just like to flag that where I think we've done some really good work over the last few years is around fire safety, and Southwark brought together all of the housing associations that operate in Southwark to look at how we address the fire safety issues of social housing together, which is in fact the first time that had been done for London, and we've now put in train a whole set of work around that happening across the whole city. But yes, thank you for the report, and we will come back with to confirm how we'll take them forward.
Perfect, thanks Kieran. And then I see Councillor Pollock has joined us. Leo, can you just introduce yourself as well, because you missed it at the beginning?
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I was having trouble with my computer. Councillor Leo Pollock, I'm the Cabinet Member for Social Regeneration, Great Estates and New Council Homes. Thanks,
now you can ask your question.
It wasn't really just to kind of echo Kieran. This is a really welcome and important report, actually, because we find that so many of our residents live in housing association properties and don't have the same kind of predictable routes of recourse to solving problems that are, you know, all things going to plan, kind of clear for council tenants. I wanted to just speak on this really because we had quite a serious incident in my ward last week. There was a very serious fire in a Peabody block that was fortuitously at 11 o'clock at night, and people were able to vacate properly, though there were a lot of kids kind of going through quite thick smoke in communal corridors. And I'm mindful that Peabody
We've lost you, Leo.
Responsive and to make sure that all of those points of recourse to local housing officers and regional and customer service officers who are responsible for housing and housing associations across the borough are made as easily accessible as is the case for council properties, as well as a question really about the wider partnerships that we could potentially develop with housing associations, not just for management and maintenance, but potentially for building new social housing as well.
Would you like me to come back on those, Rebecca?
Go on.
Yeah, so I'm Leo, I apologise for the first part of your question because I'm afraid you dropped out and I couldn't hear the full question. But the second part around soft power, I think that's what we're trying to get at as the Commission, that we as a council have. Kieran rightly used the phrase soft power. We've got a lot of soft power in terms of our relationship with housing associations. And clearly we exist as a council, as an administration, in order to improve the lives of everyone in the borough, irrespective of what kind of tenure they have and who their landlord is. So that's one area in which we could use that, but I'm afraid I didn't get the first question.
Do you want to repeat it quickly, Leo?
I'll put it in an email.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So in which case I've got no one else indicating they want to contribute on this, so we can move to a vote on the two recommendations 1 and 2 on page 11. So all those in favour?
Agreed.
Anyone
Agreed.
against? No. And anyone abstaining? No. Excellent. Thank you very much, Gavin. So we move to the next item on the agenda, which is the report from the Education and Business Scrutiny Commission on exclusions and alternative provision. So Councillor Peter Babudu, who's the chair of that commission, has been invited to attend. So I'm going to hand over, Peter, to you just to do the same and draw attention to any particular highlights from the report that you want us to consider before we move on to questions.
Sure, thanks very much, Rebecca. Apologies, my daughter just walked in, so I'm a little distracted. Yes, also my connection can be a bit unreliable, so you can see me now, but I might disappear at some point. Just the first thing to highlight, I'd like to thank the Commission and all the people who contributed to producing what I think is a really important report. If I could just take a few minutes to really zip through. We know that nationally there is an exclusions crisis, that it has profound effects on the life chances of young people, and that it is disproportionately affecting certain groups. So we know that Black, Asian and minority ethnic people nationally are more likely to be excluded, as are those with special educational needs, and those in receipt of free school meals. As well as the crisis we have in exclusions, there are large increases in the amount of young people who are being home educated, and there are similar concerns around riders of suspected cases of off-rolling. And finally, because this report looks at alternative provision as well, we know that nationally there's the results that children in alternative provision achieve are quite consistently disappointing. So the Commission looked at the specific case of what's happening in Southwark, and we had evidence from a range of people. We brought in the Regional Schools Commissioner, we surveyed all of the secondary schools in Southwark, heard from alternative provision outside of the borough, as well as making a visit to the pupil referral unit in Southwark. And we found, we had findings that fell into 7 areas. On the exclusions front, we identified that Black, Asian and minority ethnic people are twice as likely to be excluded as their proportion of Southwark students suggests, which is a really concerning statistic. We also found that of exclusions in Southwark, 2 academy chains are responsible for a disproportionate share of exclusions. And we heard from young people just the toll that all of these exclusions are taking. And from the range of work we did, we developed quite a clear sense that that there appears to just be a greater willingness to exclude in certain schools than in others. And in regard to off-rolling, we identified that there are various schools which have potentially been involved in off-rolling, and that the council's response to suspected cases of off-rolling does face challenges. So the council's data does suggest that it's happening across a number of schools, but we seem to the Commission was not satisfied that we were present identifying and challenging those suspected cases robustly enough. If I could kind of draw our work together a bit more, in relation to alternative provision in the borough, we found that results had been worsening over the last few years, and this is a kind of this was a particularly big concern to the Commission. We heard from SILS that that they often felt that they were working with young people just too late in the day, and that kind of earlier involvement would have been really useful. If I could just kind of jump to some of our recommendations, we found amongst schools that there was a clear commitment to doing things differently, and our lead recommendation is that the council works with schools to pursue a 100% inclusion commitment, which explicitly seeks to get the commitment from schools to excluding. And we heard from the Association of Head Teachers that this is something that they would be get behind if there's a shared commitment with the council about how we might do so. We've also got specific recommendations around how the council might better challenge cases of off-rolling and some of the early steps it might take in rethinking how we approach alternative provision.
Great, thanks, Peter. I've got loads of Cabinet members who want to speak, so I'm just going to write down my list. So Kieran, you were first.
Thank you, and thank you, Peter, and thank you to the whole commission. I think this is one of the most upsetting and powerful reports we've had for a while. I guess my main question is, you've got some very clear recommendations in here, Peter, but what would you put at the very top of the list of the things that you think in those recommendations that we must make the most progress on?
Okay, great. I'll come back on that one. I think the kind of headline commitment of how do we actually, I think one of the suggestions was that an inclusion commitment would come in the context of a broader charter that would be agreed with schools, and that feels like really central, because amidst all of this, we have to recognise that not only is the kind of regulatory environment complex, the role of the local authority is far constrained to what it previously was. So if we're going to make progress here, it just needs to be in conjunction with, it needs to be in conjunction with schools. So that feels like the major one. And it will need some frank conversations, because schools did speak about the challenges they have and where they would have liked additional earlier support with children who are facing challenges. So there'll need to be both sides coming to the table really willing to find some solutions. But I think it's really critical that we get clear on that commitment to stopping exclusions happening as they are. When we see the breakdown of who is getting excluded, it's clear that it's having a disproportionate effect on Black, Asian, and other minority ethnic students, as well as other vulnerable young people.
Great. Okay. Jasmine.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you, Peter, and thank you for your commission for this amazing report. It's already added so much value. I mean, the fact that you put a light on the data and the problems that you are having getting the data and the information, that's a hard lesson for us to learn, really, the schools and the council. And that's something that we can start getting right straight away, really. I did want to say the work on the human cost of exclusions, the practices of rolling, and the growing numbers of home educated, which would, be interesting to look at that trend, after the, as we loosen the lockdown and we open the schools, to look at that trend again. I think, all of this is added value, and we'll get on with, I can't see any recommendation in here that I disagree with. I mean, I just wanted to add that you attended the conference with head teachers that we'd organised, and that was all about keeping children in school. So I think, between the work that you've done, the work that Evelyn's done with her panel, which tackled school exclusions as well, and what the department is now doing, that three-pronged, light on this issue is already reaping some good results, I think. I did want to add on the BAME issue, the work that Councillor Sittu is leading on Southwark Together. That gives us another opportunity to shine the light on this and exclusions. And already, we're getting some, even more recommendations on how we can actually we'll accept all those recommendations. We're already working with some of that. And I just want to again thank you and the Commission for all your work on this. I do want to say we'll come back formally in 8 weeks and see what this working will look like. And my last point is, you know, I want the departments. I spoke with David Quirk Thornton at length about this report this week. And, you know, we'll rise to your challenge. You know, you've asked for, you know, a bold approach to this. So let's see when we come back in 8 weeks if we can add a few bold suggestions of our own on the back of the work that you've been doing. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jasmine. Evelyn?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter, for this report. I mean, this is a timely and a rather really important report. We both sat on a serious youth violence panel, as Jasmine just alluded to, and exclusion was one of the big topics on that panel. And we basically, you know, we charged the council to do something about it, and you went away and you looked at it in depth. I must say, looking at the report, my concerns have increased because, you know, if you look, the data that the report actually talks about, so over 80% of our young people being excluded are from the BAME community, which is rather concerning. You also mentioned about the declining in resorts in our SEALS education unit. Again, a rather concerning aspect. And I think going forward, we need to keep, you know, our eyes on this and not, you know, kind of let it go. And which I know Jasmine is doing great work in this area. I know she's as passionate as we are in getting things right. But I will ask your Commission to maintain an oversight of the development and improvement in this area, because I think, you know, we all need to kind of work together to ensure that things improve, and especially working with our academies. I mean, it's alarming to see that 2 of our academies in the borough are responsible for the disproportionate amount of exclusion. You know, we need to do something about it. So again, as I will ask for your Commission, just to keep an oversight of the kind of updates going forward. Thank you.
Peter, I don't know if you want to come back on anything from Evelyn and Jasmine before we keep going.
Just to say thanks both for your comments. Jasmine, in particular, officers have been open to the kind of thoroughgoing look that the Commission's taken, which has rightly kind of challenged us to think about how we could do better. And just Evelyn, I would agree that it's really important that the Commission continues to look at this and. We've towards the end of the report in appendix 1, we've just tried to really like structure how we'll keep on looking at this with Jasmine and her team in terms of like actually having just a checklist across all the aspects of these recommendations, so we can really drill down on like how we take things forward and improve as.
Great. Okay, so then I've got Johnson and then Leo. So Johnson, do you want to go first?
So colleagues have said, and I'll just echo that. Thank you to Peter and thank you to the Commission for tackling and looking into this important piece of work. A couple of points from me. It's the work that we've been doing with Southwark Stands Together. This has come up again, time and again, actually, both in terms of the general listing events, but also the work that we were doing in education and the meeting that Jasmine led with the head teachers as well. And I welcome the commitment that schools have to tackling this as well, and welcome Cabinet colleagues' commitment to it as well. You particularly highlight that there were a couple of academies that you mentioned had the brunt of exclusions. I wanted to get a sense of what engagement you had with those academies, and particularly any lessons to pick up from those engagement exercises within the Commission as well. And one thing that struck me with the Stands Together work over the last couple of weeks is the wider impact it has as well, not just to the young person, but indeed the family and the wider community as well. So I welcome the fact that we're paying focus to this, because it's so important to our communities out there.
Great, and then Leo.
Thanks. there's a part of me that would quite like to hear an answer to Johnson's question actually before I put mine. But I just wanted to also say a huge thank you to Peter and the Commission for this report. My only criticism of it is that I wish it had come 6 months earlier for purposes of problem that we've had in relation to a procurement exercise we had with our architects framework. It had so I really wanted to just ask Peter. I know he's familiar with some of the issues there. It did a lot of things to try and remove a lot of the traditional barriers that you see in the architect profession, which is notoriously white middle class, to a wider range of practices, but it didn't really succeed at all when it came to the diversity of firms that we were awarding to. So there are a number of initiatives, particularly upstream and downstream, of how we're trying to adapt the procurement, adapt the framework, as well as improve access into the profession at school age. So I just wanted to ask Peter if he'd be able to review some of the work that we're doing on that, so we can try and get a better outcome.
Peter, do you want to come back on both of those?
Yeah, sure. With Leo's, maybe I'll come back to Leo's a bit more substantively after I've chatted about the procurement report. But on Johnson's, good question. The two academy chains that's in the report were ARC and Harris. ARC engaged quite positively and provided quite detailed responses in terms of why their rates were at where they were and the steps they were taking to lower them because they agreed they weren't acceptable. And we had them come along to the Commission as well as provide a written report. So that was pretty encouraging. And in the case of Harris, we didn't get engagement, which was a real point of frustration actually, because particularly Harris Academy Peckham was excluding a rate just far beyond the others. The only kind of caveat to all of that I would raise is, like, we saw great practice across like various schools, and we heard from some of the FACE schools that seem to be really taking a lot of steps to avoid excluding pupils. But we saw that some issues can arise in various unexpected places. So during the Commission's work, I was contacted by a parent whose child went to an otherwise kind of well-performing school according to our stats, but it appeared that he'd been off-rolled, and we managed to kind of successfully challenge that in the background as the Commission works. And I think it's just something that reflects that we really need to that we really need to be putting real attention on schools to make sure that they do follow the regulations around any exclusion that is conducted, and if they can't exclude somebody, to not try and do it through the back door.
Leo, was your question actually about the procurement report, which is the next item, and should we keep it for the next one?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. In which case, I think that's everybody. But if people can put their hand down, that would really help, because otherwise it's impossible to tell what's going on. So in which case, we've got two recommendations on page 22 of this report. So all those in favour?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Anyone against? And any abstentions? No, in which case I think Peter has also joined, so I'm going to hand back over to him if that is the case.
Thanks very much indeed, Rebecca. We move on to item 10, which is about procurement, accessibility and social value, and it's another report from Peter Babudu as Chair of the Education and Business Scrutiny Commission, and we're to receive your report today. Peter.
Thanks, Peter. I'll try and be reasonably brief here. But the other strand of work that the Commission looked at was looking at how accessible procurement opportunities are in Southwark to local businesses, and particularly businesses led by people with certain protected characteristics. So we looked at BAME-led businesses in particular, and it feels like the work of this it feels like this report's become all the more important in light of the Black Lives Matter movement and of Brexit kind of taking place during the kind of course of this commission, not to mention some of the fallout from the coronavirus pandemic. So one of the main challenges the commission kind of faced in doing this work was that as it stands at present, the council captures quite limited information about the profile of people who lead businesses that sell services to Southwark. So and also because of the decentralised nature of procurement in the council, it means that it can be difficult and sometimes impossible to get centralised data on various aspects of procurement performance. So whether that's the amount of kind of local tendering that is taking place, or the broader profile of businesses within the borough. However, the commission worked with business improvement districts across the borough, a selection of businesses that we spoke to, and we took a bit of a national view as well about what good practice looks in terms of making procurement accessible to a wider range of organisations, and what can be achieved in terms of building community wealth through that exercise. And our findings fell into four broad areas. One was around the data, the kind of data landscape within the council, and I've spoken a bit to that already. The second was like the view of small businesses on how accessible council procurement is, and the takeaways there were that SMEs know that bidding is a skill that very much needs to be learned, and that this can be a challenge. From the perspective of BAME-led businesses, we spoke to some BAME support, so some BAME-focused business support organisations, and they bemoaned a number of factors, including the lack of kind of case studies, model examples that such businesses had, as well as kind of qualifying criteria that can hold them back from making it onto lists. The commission also wanted to take an early look at social value practice within the borough in light of our recently approved Fairer Futures procurement framework. And so we tried to very much focus on what can be achieved in terms of delivering social value through such frameworks. And as well as the kind of often looked at kind of precedent example, we looked at places like South Tyneside, where there's been some real success in increasing and sometimes doubling the amount of local procurement that's happening via the council, and also of encouraging larger businesses within a borough to actually procure more locally, which felt like really important takeaways for the council. So there were 9 recommendations in this report, which span just some appropriate data ambitions for the council in terms of the data that we should collect, so that we actually know how we can do better. We identified a number of steps that could be taken to improve accessibility of procurement. On the social value perspective, we had a clear recommendation just encouraging the council to be quite bold and clear in terms of expecting social value to be incorporated into contracts whenever possible, and we've included a lot of model examples about how that might be done. And then on procurement practice more generally, we were encouraging the council to learn from the model of SLPN, where there's a clear alignment of getting developers and other big businesses to actually commit to doing more local procurement. And we've seen that there's been some quite big successes in this area that might be replicated, even if on a pilot basis within Southwark. So that's a kind of quick whistle-stop tour of the tour of the report. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Peter. Very, very timely indeed. I've got Johnson and Vicky and Leo. Did you have a question outstanding from the last conversation?
I asked it, so
okay, fine. So Johnson and Vicky. Johnson and then Vicky.
So again, thank you, Peter, and the Commission for the work that you've done on this. And as others have said, very, very timely. And we are looking at this as part of Southwark Stands Together. And Leo's talked about the work that he's been looking at in terms of architects framework as well. Just wanted to welcome the work that's come out of this in terms of recommendation. It was good to be able to join the commission for part of the discussion. I particularly want to highlight the work you've looked at in terms of the role of planning. It's important that we highlight that we've got a good track record as a borough in terms of unlocking employment and unlocking support for local people to get into jobs. We have made some inroads into supporting small businesses, but as you quite rightly highlight, there is an opportunity for us to look at how we go further. And I've had an early discussion with Councillor Cryan on this, and we both agree there's an opportunity to go further on this as well. So welcome the work on this, and look forward to be able to implement those recommendations.
Thanks, Johnson. Vicky Mills.
Thank you, and thank you to Peter and the committee for this work on this. I suppose in a way it forms a kind of really useful bit of pre-scrutiny to the Fairer Future procurement framework, which is kind of due to come back in December. And we made some quite radical changes 18 months ago, and I know that many of us wanted to go further. So there's an opportunity to review what we did 18 months, 2 years ago, and actually say, okay, now we need to do these things too. So in a way, I think this is a really, really good way to feed into that review and what more needs to be done in December. I suppose, and I know that Peter and I have had this conversation before, and I always feel like I should repeat it, is, you know, we have taken a broad decision in Southwark that actually, you know, the where services can come in-house, we believe that absolutely maximises social value for both employees, but also for service users. So I think it's kind of like making sure that we understand that we might never be quite like Preston, because we are going to have much bigger in-house services, and there are kind of great benefits to that. But therefore, what we are still procuring from elsewhere, how can we absolutely maximise the kind of social value to the borough? And I think there's obviously more that we can be doing.
Thanks, Vicky. Peter, did you want to respond to either of those points? I mean, largely welcoming, obviously, this work, and we will report back to you in due course.
Yeah, if I could just come back a little bit, particularly on Vicky and Leo's earlier point, I think just very much agreed in terms of like in-house is great, and we'll very much be able to bake in lots of kind of social value that way. I think the report was very much just recognising that there's a huge amount of procurement activity that does go on, and where we can't deliver it in-house, there is lots of potential for securing additional social value. And the Commission welcomed some of the kind of early tweaks that have already taken place in terms of providing additional training to procurement teams across the council so that they can incorporate social value well. We just want to encourage along that process. There's elsewhere, like I think South Townside was a good example of it. There's a lot of experience in just like kind of creating lots of model clauses that can be relevant for different departments, and things like that might just help make sure that where we do have to procure things, we can do it well. On Leo's point, if I might come back a bit broadly, I think lots of the problems we see at the procurement stage, I agree, have begun earlier. And so when we look at the kind of thicket of challenges Bainland businesses feel they face, it's they've been a long time in the making. One of the things we try to impress in the procurement report is, because these challenges are so thorny, there's a whole range of like longer term steps that might be taken in terms of provider forums, sharing more information, making sure we've got kind of local lists and similar. But the Commission was also really supportive of us having some ambitious targets around what we actually want to achieve in terms of greater volumes of local procurement, greater diversity in terms of who we procure from, and would just kind of very much encourage us to again think boldly in that regard as well. Like let's try and do some long-term solutions, but let's also set some shorter-term targets which we can work towards to improve outcomes in the near future.
Thanks, Peter. Johnson, is your hand up again, or is it just not down from?
No, it's just not down.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, colleagues, thank you for that. We're asked to note the report and respond to it in due course. Is that okay? Can we do that?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We move on. Another scrutiny report, this time from the Environment Scrutiny Commission on air quality. And Leanne Werner, are you? I see LW at the bottom.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great. I'm having a bit of problems with my internet connection, so I'm going to keep the video off for the time being. But thanks very much for the introduction. So I just wanted to start by talking about, so over the last year, we've been looking at the causes of air pollution and the ways we can improve air quality in Southwark. Why did we decide to focus on air pollution? Well, you probably already know this, but it's worth reiterating it. 1/3 of deaths from stroke, lung cancer and heart disease are due to air pollution. Exposure to air quality is associated with ill health and premature death. To put it bluntly, air pollution kills. And one of the biggest contributors to poor air quality are transport emissions, particularly diesel. Furthermore, recent evidence indicates that air pollution may be a key contributor to COVID-19 deaths. So that's why we decided to look at it and what we could do at the council to improve air quality. It should be highlighted that air quality is hard to escape and tends to be unequally distributed. We found that car ownership is closely linked to higher incomes, while the harm of traffic causes falls most heavily on those with the lowest income. In Southwark, 69% of households in Newington Ward have no car or van access, whereas only 28% in Village Ward households do not. Air pollution is clearly a social justice issue, and we've seen that more recently with deaths from COVID. It's clear that we need a major reduction in cars. Alongside this, we need to move to good walking and cycling routes and improve public transport. So it's quite a lengthy report. So I wanted to go through some of the key recommendations. I'll keep it brief. So we believe that there should be a delivery of low traffic neighbourhoods across Southwark, starting with areas with the highest levels of public transport, the worst air quality and the most vulnerable populations. Any risk of displacement of traffic onto main roads must be complemented by measures to prevent this. We need to make it as easy as possible for people to cycle. This could be done through repurposing 10% of the curbside car storage to cycle storage within the next 18 months. We think that could be easily done. And we need to roll out bike storage in the tens of thousands. Directly replacing car spaces with bike storage is essential. Currently, it's common for cars to be charged in the region of £125 per year for residential parking, whereas at spaces for a bike handler storing up 6 bikes is about £48. In light of this, we recommend that parking charges should increase. Overall, we recommend the reduction over time of parking made available, and we need to set ambitious targets for this. And we need to halve petrol and diesel road journeys by 2025. We also need to look at rolling out sustainable freight. Light goods vehicle traffic has risen by 30% in London since 2012, and we think this could be. We think by rolling out sustainable freight, this could really help reduce the level, and this can be incorporated into regenerative projects. Low traffic neighbourhoods and coordinated with bids across Southwark. And it's really critical that we continue to work closely with TfL. At present, the ULEZ expansion is only planned to extend to the South Circular. We think it will be beneficial to extend it to the whole of the borough. And above all, we need a holistic vision and a communication plan that sets out what a zero carbon Southwark looks like. It's fundamental that so we need to make it clear that by making fundamental changes to how we travel and live, we're we can create long-lasting health benefits, and we need to highlight those. And I think I just want to say, yeah, the coronavirus pandemic has shown that governments, both in the UK and Europe, and councils across the country, can implement potentially unpopular policies in the interest of public good. In Southwark, I think we've seen extremely positive signs. So we've had, you know, the first large-scale low-traffic neighbourhood scheme has started to be implemented. We've seen delivery of protected cycle lanes and the widening of pavements, as well as the implementation of school streets. So yeah, those are my key points.
Thank you very much indeed.
Put my camera back on.
Oh, thanks very much. Okay, I think we had Richard and then Jasmine.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I just wanted to thank the Commission for its work, and I think yeah, there's some big challenges that you set out for us there, but actually a lot of this is stuff that we're already thinking as part of the next steps in terms of what we're doing as a movement plan, what we do for the climate emergency. And as you said, I think some of that work on low traffic neighbourhoods in particular, obviously now taking forward through the street space programme, which wouldn't have been the case when the Commission first looked at this. So I think, you know, there's some really good recommendations here that we will look at in detail and work through. But I think lots of the messages here are things that we're already taking on board and are putting in place in some parts on some of those recommendations. So thank you very much.
Jasmine.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to you and your Commission for this report. Well, you in particular, really, you've been a consistent champion, and I think, you know, it's really important to raise these issues again and again. And while Richard's right, you know, he's taken on board a lot of these already. I think in the school streets in particular, people are happy where we've got to, but even the parental lobby think we can even go bolder. And I think it's absolutely right, you know, where we can't close every school street immediately, then we should be widening pavements and we should be making it absolutely, you know, much easier. So thank you. And it's added so much value, really. It's really good that we have a champion on scrutiny raising these issues. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Jasmine, for that. Well, again, we're asked to consider the recommendations and request that the relevant cabinet member reports back. So Richard, that'll be over to you. So thank you very much indeed. Can we agree that recommendation?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thanks very much indeed. Okay, a second scrutiny review of the climate emergency strategy.
Yeah,
Leanne, this is on our main agenda again.
Getting good value for money. 2 scrutiny reports for 1. So yeah, so again, we looked at the climate emergency strategy, the emerging climate emergency strategy, and we focused on the driving the principles driving the strategy, themes, and the engagement process. The Commission made a first report back in October 2019, and the second report that we just submitted reflects on Cabinet's feedback, looking at a number of issues. So local transport emissions, as I've just discussed in the air quality report, highlights planning, regeneration and carbon offsetting, and community energy. So I just wanted to go through a few of the highlights of the reports and what we recommend. So we recommend we need to address the ecological emergency. We talk about the climate emergency, but we fail to talk about the ecological emergency, and we think that needs to be incorporated into the strategy. I don't think it's enough to just protect biodiversity in the borough, but increase it. We need a strategy guided by the fairer future promises and the environmental principles of a just transition. Again, that was discussed in the air quality report. It needs to be we need a data-driven strategy that maps its emissions and consumption data. We need to make sure that we're working in partnership and with community groups, businesses across the borough. And I think with this, we need specific plans and timelines and when we're actually going to engage the community. I didn't see that in the strategy. Other things, so we need to look at community energy. by identifying all solar opportunities in the borough. Again, going back to the transport system, so we need to another strategy, so a transformative strategy which sets out changes to our transport system, and how we can get more people walking, cycling, and taking public transports. So I think those are the key ones, key recommendations. Yeah, over to you, Richard.
Thank you very much indeed, Leanne. Well, I mean, we're going to be moving on to consideration of the climate strategy, but this will require Richard as the cabinet member to respond to in any event. Richard, is there anything that you wanted to say? You've still got your hand up, as has Jasmine, but I imagine again that's a hangover from.
Well, mine was a new hand putting up. Just really to thank Leanne for the report. I think I was really impressed by the research that's gone into it. I think some really thorough stuff that's gone into here, and I think it certainly adds a great deal to the thinking that the council's already been doing on the climate emergency. So certainly want to thank the committee, but I think Leanne personally, because I know a lot of this has been her personally that has been pushing this forward. So I think it's been a really powerful piece of work. And obviously we'll respond within the 8 weeks as if this is agreed by everybody else in cabinet, but I'm assuming it will. But we'll want to work out how we can most effectively thread that through into the work that's going forward in terms of developing the action plan and all the other work that's happening on the strategy over the next few months. And I know that Leanne, as a member of the working group that we set up with members, will be a really important voice to help us do that.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard. There's a comment in the meeting chat. I can't tell who is speaking. Well, that was Richard Livingston, who is the cabinet member with responsibility for climate emergency. And before him, it was Councillor Leanne Werner, who chairs the Scrutiny Commission in Southwark, which looks at climate change and environmental issues. So she was reporting back on the work that they have been doing. Okay, well, we're to receive the report and report back in 8 weeks. Can we agree that, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Agreed.
And just before we move on to the climate change strategy, Ian Wingfield, who's chair of Overview and Scrutiny, is in the meeting. And Ian, you were going to say a few words.
Yes, I can talk for hours, Peter, if you like.
Just a few, if you want. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say thank you to the chairs and congratulate them and their members on the commissions for all the excellent work that they've done and the time and effort they devoted in producing these reports. I genuinely believe this demonstrates the great value that scrutiny brings to the decision-making processes and policies of the council overall. The wealth of subjects and content before you today demonstrates the commitment and consideration given by scrutiny members as a whole. Indeed, most of the recommendations before you today are an innovation for Southwark, and not just for Southwark, for local government as a whole. And scrutiny, as I'm sure you will acknowledge, Chair, plays an important role in assuring the wider public that we hold ourselves to account and are transparent in our decision making. Scrutiny also acts to ensure that both topical and emergent issues are deliberated upon throughout the year, and the present system of OSC and its commissions allows that balance of deep dives on particular subjects and constant monitoring of critical issues. So in this way, scrutiny adds to the perception of the council as being responsive and alert to the needs of its residents, and I'm sure this is something which isn't lost on the members of the cabinet. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ian, and thank you for the work you've done leading scrutiny over the last 12 months, and particularly in the last few months where it's been particularly difficult and challenging for everyone as part of this new normal of democratic processes.
Thank you.
Okay, we move on to the climate change strategy for Southwark, and Richard, this is your report.
Thank you, Chair. And Chris Page, who's the author of the report, is available as well. Just so that to recap very briefly on this, we obviously, as a council, declared the climate emergency last year and set ourselves the challenging target of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. And so this is the next step in the process of being able to achieve that very challenging goal. You'll see here the sort of framework of the strategy that we're putting forward. I think it's probably worth saying from the outset that I think for a strategy to be really effective and to hit that challenging goal, it needs to be effective, it needs to be carefully understanding what's creating carbon and what measures we can put in place to address that. It needs to be acting as an emergency, so it's no good as trying to work out how we get to places in 2040, 2050. We need to be aiming towards getting things in place to achieve the aim by 2030. We need that urgency. And I think most importantly, we need to engage effectively with our communities. It's no good us as a council coming up with a plan in isolation without taking the community with us, because we know it's going to ultimately need all of us to make some adjustments in how we live our lives. I think the COVID emergency speaks well to how communities can adapt how they live their lives in response to an emergency. And so I think there's a real challenge for us as a council to highlight quite the scale of the emergency for people and what it is practically they can do about it. It's really important that we commit ourselves as a council to that action, but we also understand how other actors can change as well. To help us in this process, we've set up a partnership steering group, so we've been taking on board lots of stakeholder voices as well in terms of how we take our work forward. We've also, and it had its first meeting last week, set up the members working group on this, which is cross-party, but was agreed by previous cabinet to oversee how we were taking this work. The report here is a really important milestone in going forward, but the real critical piece of work that we need to do in terms of engagement is what follows when we agree this. We had hoped to do that at an earlier stage. That was obviously challenging given lockdown, which happened just as we were about to launch a borough conference to bring people together. We have been using Traverse as a company to already do some online engagement, and you'll see in Appendix 2 the report that's come from there. I think that's really helpful reading to contextualise some of the things that we are doing. It comes with a huge health warning, because I think at the moment, if you look at it, we need to work more on the diversity of where our responses are coming from. The report at the moment is disproportionately white. It's disproportionately from people from home owning backgrounds, for example. So I think in terms of income levels and ethnicity, we need to do more work. But I think the work that's been done already, I think first of all identifies that those are areas that we need to be concentrating more on in terms of engagement and working out how we do that more effectively. But the themes that come through that report show that we are trying to do the right things. I won't talk for too much longer, but you'll see the report. There's 5 key areas and themes that we're developing. One about buildings, construction and regeneration, one about transport and travel, one about diversity, trees and green spaces, one about consumption, and one about energy. And we think those are the 5 key areas where we need to be doing more to achieve our goals. And although the ongoing engagement will help us over the rest of the year get to a point where we have a finalised strategy of all the actions, all the targets in there, I think it's also important to recognise that we're not waiting for this strategy to be in place to take action. So you'll see at paragraph 33 a number of things that we're already doing as the strategy is engaging. We talked about street space earlier, but also what we're doing about carbon from new buildings, for example, in particular looking at carbon offsetting and whether we can make the Old Kent Road a carbon neutral opportunity area, as well as looking at lots of aspects in terms of our housing strategy around heating and other responses about how we can play a role there. So there's a lot of work that's being underpinned here. There's a lot more needed to be done. There's certainly a lot more engagement that we need, and the conversation continues, but I think we've made some really good progress on this.
Thank you, Richard, and thanks to Chris Page, our Director of Climate Emergency, who has obviously helped author this report. And again, a question, the 5 headings of building, construction, regeneration, transport and travel, biodiversity, trees and green spaces, consumption and energy. So those are the 5 headings. And if anyone wants to go to the southwark.gov.uk website, you can follow the link through to meetings and agendas of the cabinet, and the full report is there. But this is something I hope that will be on the kind of the front page of our website in short order. So buildings, construction, regeneration, transport and travel, biodiversity, trees and green spaces, consumption and energy. Okay, I've got 3 people who've indicated: Johnson, Leo and Kieran.
Yeah, so I wanted to, again, to echo the point that you just made, Leader, in terms of thanking Richard and thanking Chris and everybody who's worked on this. I know there's been a cross-party effort in terms of councillors, and I know the community have fed into this as well. I wanted to amplify what Councillor Livingston's just said, particularly the scale of ambition on the Oak Kent Road in respect of the commitment that we're highlighting in this. And it's paragraph 33, and it's a commitment to go further than certainly any regeneration project I know, and to have a target towards being carbon neutral, and also to have the lowest carbon footprint of any regeneration scheme in Britain. So the scale of ambition is significant, and we'll be putting forward plans to how to achieve that. And also we'll be the first project to do this, but absolutely making sure that the jobs that are generated as a result of this very much speaks to our commitment to social justice as well. And we'll be looking at carbon offsetting fund to see how we can enable that job creation, and also address some of the big issues that have come up as part of the discussion as well. So the scale of ambition in this strategy is significant, and I wanted to highlight that point, and to thank everybody that's done a significant amount of work to get to this point, and look forward to the consultation over the next few months.
Leo.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to repeat my thanks to Richard and Chris for all the work they've done here. It's a foundational document. It's extremely important that we are taking this as a cross-borough, cross-council initiative, because the climate emergency, we can only really be tackling it in every area of the economy and every area of council services and activity that we have. I just wanted to comment briefly also on a kind of similar aspect to what Johnson's talking about in relation to the New Homes programme. It's so easy in the current climate for efforts to tackle the housing crisis to frustrate efforts to tackle the climate crisis, and vice versa. And I think it's really important that we have a proactive agenda to ensure that we're doing both at once, and in the process transforming a lot of our kind of the ways in which we ordinarily bring forward council house building. I'm really pleased to see in this report that we have a strong emphasis on the importance of bringing forward low waste, low impact, low ecological impact forms of development. We've been pioneers in terms of bringing forward rooftop housing that preserves the embodied energy and carbon of existing buildings. We've been pioneers in thinking about how we can bring forward waterways development, which isn't really happening anywhere else. We've also been really proactive in making sure that new developments coming forward in our New Homes programme are thinking not just about habitats for humans, but habitats for urban wildlife as well. So the nature recovery plans, the work Leanne rightly mentioned about not only protecting biodiversity but enhancing it, is right there in this strategy. I also just wanted to refer as well to the wider work that needs to be done to bring forward low embodied energy development. At the minute, we don't have a particularly strong forestry industry and timber industry in this country that can bring forward timber building in a safe way and at any meaningful scale, and bring ourselves off of concrete and steel in the building of our council homes. So it's really important that we're proactive on the lobbying piece there to be driving that reforestation agenda, not just in the green belt around London, but beyond. And there are a whole number of other things as well that are really important in relation to bringing down the operational energy and getting to a carbon negative position for the way our new council homes are managed. I just want to ask a question really in relation to the action plan that will follow this, and the extent to which we'll be really nailing down some specific targets and milestones on the detail of all these different work streams, because I think if we have that accountability there, year after year, then we'll be able to better make progress.
Thank you very much indeed, Leo. Kieran.
thank you, and a really important report, and obviously a really one of the kind of biggest three strands, I suppose, of work that we have going on in the borough. I just wanted to highlight the real importance within this of existing homes as well. Clearly our 55 council homes pay a significant contribution to carbon emissions in the borough, and so one of our commitments is to look at all the work we can do to bring them up to a new energy efficiency standard. And of course that delivers not just the carbon reductions, but delivers homes that are more affordable for people to live in. I think it is worth saying at this moment, though, that we saw the budget announcements from the Chancellor for 2 billion nationally to retrofit private sector homes. To put that in context, to retrofit our Southwark council homes up to what we think would be a really good standard would take a quarter of that money in Southwark alone for our council homes. So there's a real need here for real government ambition to sit alongside the kind of ambition that we have in Southwark. The last thing I'll say, I think one of the exciting immediate opportunities for us is around cell chip. Cell chip at the moment is chucking kilowatts of heat out into the atmosphere, and it really is an opportunity for us to genuinely capture energy for free, at least free in terms of carbon emissions, for our residents to use.
Thanks very much indeed, Kieran. There was a question in there from Leo, and Richard, you might just want to comment on the other contributions briefly.
Yeah, no, very briefly. I think they're all really helpful contributions. I think all showed how, whilst I might be the lead member for climate emergency, this is something that runs like the letters in a stick of rock through the entire council and the work of the cabinet. As an old public servant, I absolutely agree with Leo's point about specificity. Sorry, if I could actually say the word. Could you
say that again? Yes,
about the specifics in targets and how we need to make sure that things are measurable, achievable, resource, timely and specific in terms of how we set them out and have the ambition within it. I don't know if Chris wants to add anything further.
Thanks very much, Councillor. On the action plan part, yes, absolutely. The intention is that the action plan will be the detail behind the strategy that sets out what we're going to do by when. It will be a first take of things like sort of key milestones and those sorts of things. A piece of work we also need to do alongside this is actually costing out a lot of the things in the strategy, partly so that we know what we need to spend as a council, but also where the other costs lie, but also so we can identify the gap of spending. As Councillor Williams mentioned, that if we were to retrofit all of our houses, the cost would be extortionate and not something we can meet. But we need to know what that cost is if we're to lobby government and others to get it. So the action plan hopefully will give you all of that, and will give you that sort of detail that means that we're clear about what we're going to do, but also so that we can be held to account both internally but also from our partners and our residents.
Thanks, Chris. Will it give us the specificity, which I think should be a challenge before we get into the cabinet, quite frankly? Can you say specificity 6 times? Leo, you've already spoken. I'm not going to take you again. So we've got 3 recommendations. No, we've got 3 recommendations to agree and to take this forward. Can we agree those, please, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Loud and clear. Richard, we stay with you because we need to adopt a street space plan.
Yeah, Peter, thank you for this. Unfortunately, you missed the deputation from Southwark Cyclists and Living Streets and Mums for Lungs, which I thought probably did a very good job at setting out why we need this strategy and what we are doing. And I thought was very helpful in terms of setting the scene for that. So I'm not going to say too much more. Clearly, the strategy that we've got here is stuff that we are working on already. It's very much in line with what TfL and government are asking for. We know the big challenge that we face given COVID. On the first hand, as Councillor Werner was saying earlier, has set out some of the challenge for us in terms of air quality, the impact of COVID has had, and the reason that has perhaps stressed the urgency of what we need to do. But I think also with people not returning to public transport, we need to ensure that this isn't a car-led recovery if we're to avoid air pollution becoming even worse. And we already have, in some points in the borough, already have car levels now that exceed pre-COVID levels. So if we're to prevent that happening, we need to be intervening to make cycling and walking better. And we do need to create the space for social distancing in some locations as well. So this report talks about the actions that we've taken already, the ones that we're doing already in the future. There'll be further proposals that we take forward through the commonplace consultation that we're carrying out, and the ideas coming through that. So this isn't a complete list, but it is a list of what we have in train already to do. And it's worth noting as well, we've already received a promise of £1 million from TfL and government to help us fund this work, although some of the work is from our own resources, such as the school streets work.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard. Okay, I am sorry I missed that deputation, but as you say, this is going to be welcomed by everyone. No one's indicating. So there are two recommendations for Cabinet to consider. Can we agree those, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. And then there's one recommendation for me to delegate authority to the Cabinet Member for Environment, Transport and Climate Emergency to amend the programme of street space measures should any variations to the programme be required, which I do. Fantastic. Thank you. We move now to the borough's emergency plan. Historically, the until 2016-17, the emergency plan, which is our generic plan in response to any emergency that falls on the borough, was buried away as an individual decision or just a report that kicked around. But we brought it out into for consideration by the Cabinet each year since. And I think it's been important making sure that Cabinet members, as political leaders, are far more aware of the sort of plans that are in place, the measures that are taken and adopted when the borough faces any emergency, be that a natural disaster, a terrorist incident, or a pandemic, as we are experiencing now. So the emergency plan has been slightly refreshed and revised just to reflect learning over this last 3 or 4 months. But here it is again before you for its annual review, and I commend it to you for adoption. Any questions or comments? Andy Snazzle, are you on the call as the man who we task each year in, year out with implementing it? Andy, any observations?
No, only that we've taken on board the recommendations from a couple of independent reviews last year. They've been incorporated. We looked at it as a holistic plan beginning of the year, and obviously COVID response is going to continue to shape, and we're going to continue to learn lessons as we move forward through our renewal and recovery stages. So it's very much, as you've just said, it's keeping it to the fore, involving elected members more, which is one of the recommendations, and continue to use the robust framework to make sure that we're in a good place to respond to anything.
Thanks very much indeed, Andy. And I think one of the bits of learning, what we've tried to do both in Southwark and across London in the last couple of years, is make sure that politicians, be they leader cabinet or ward level, have a much clearer role in responding to any emergency. What I think has become quite interesting during this pandemic, because it has evolved over a slow period of time, is that there's much more room for politicians to be involved, again, both at a borough and London level, in incidents and making decisions which otherwise would simply have fall into the hands of officers who are charged with these kinds of decisions. I think politicians can be much more involved, and that's a bit of learning for a crisis which is not limited to 3 or 4 days, but actually is 3 or 4 months already. Okay, there are 3 recommendations on page 100. Can we agree those, colleagues?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed.
Agreed.
We move to the Council's annual performance report for the last year, ending at the end of March. In 2020, we set out some pretty bold pledges to the people of the borough, and we set those out then in our council plan, which we have been carefully monitoring on a quarterly basis and reporting through Cabinet to the residents of our borough on an annual basis. And this is the latest iteration of that since 2018 we set out our pledges. we've been making great progress with all of those pledges up until March, but obviously colleagues will be aware, and anyone who's obviously following this meeting will be aware that the COVID-19 pandemic has dealt a blow to many of our ambitions in terms of meaning that we're going to have to reprioritise some things, that we won't have the funding available for others, but it's also brought to the fore issues such as the climate emergency, and given that a new priority, the recent Black Lives Matters protests and issues arising out of that, which we discussed slightly earlier on, issues of equality and social justice within our community have come far more to the fore as well. But a new and urgent need to ensure that our residents will have the skills, employment, and other opportunities to live their best lives is also going to be a new priority for us. But this is a reflective report looking back and reporting on the good progress. And I know that whatever we ultimately decide as a cabinet and council as our priorities going forward, the evidence over the last decade that we have and can continue to deliver will put us in a good place as we move forward, giving us confidence and renewed confidence that we can deliver on whatever pledges we make to the people of the borough going forward to help them through the worst of this COVID-19 crisis and pandemic. Vicky Mills.
Sorry, I'm unmuted now. I just thought I would comment just because performance sits in my world, and this is very much a kind of looking back report. It's where we were kind of as lockdown started. I suppose my reflection on this and the work that we are doing to bring forward not a new council plan but a kind of tweaked council plan in September is, you know, this is about kind of having big bold ambition but being realistic, you know, having the small steps that get you there. And I think the other lesson that we should take away from where we are now is unless you start planning what you're going to do in terms of delivering a commitment, unless you plan and get things underway, you could be knocked off course. And actually, the big reflection I have is that because we didn't put off things in May 2018, because we had a clear plan and we had clear milestones and measures, actually, although we are being knocked off course a little bit now, we, you know, many of the things that we set out to do have already been delivered. So, for example, free school meals in our school nurseries, the bit of our free healthy school meal offer that never really made sense to Camden families in Southwark has been delivered. We didn't say, oh, we won't worry about that until 2020 or 2021. So that has been done. We're not scrabbling around trying to deliver 1,000 new council homes now. We have the kind of processes in place and those sites already underway so that we stand a reasonable chance of getting over the line by May 2022. So really just a reflection that we have been knocked sideways by COVID and some things may not be achieved by May 2022, but I don't think we'll be far short of them. So I think good ambition and then a good plan to deliver them.
Thanks very much, Vicky. We'll be looking at obviously amendments to the revised plan in due course. No one else is indicated, so we're asked to note the council's performance over the last year against the council plan 2018-2022 and to bring forward a refreshed council plan to cabinet in September. Can we agree those two recommendations, please, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Agreed.
Okay, we now have a duo of Gateway 1 reports, which I think both fall to Kieran to introduce.
Thank you. I've lost my screen for a second. So the first of these is the Major Works Gateway report. So Major Works is the programme of work that we use in the first instance and the main instance in this report to bring our council homes up to a good standard. But this report also covers to a lesser degree, our council built office buildings as well. And this is really looking at what is the best way to make sure we procure for good value the work needed to do that work, and also to make sure that we do it in a way that gives residents a strong voice in choosing the providers, and make sure that we get good value for money. We've looked at a wide range of options as the report sets out, and really come down to a blended model that would include us taking some aspects of the work in-house where it's right for us to do that, of procuring major providers to deliver the bulk of the work, and also coming back with separate proposals later to look at how we can also use local businesses through separate frameworks to do things like street front properties. So I will just bring in Dave, who I think is here as well, to say a couple of words of detail about it. I think Dave's there, are you?
I am indeed. Thanks, Kieran. Evening all. Yeah, I mean, really, just to sort of reinforce what Kieran's just sort of passed on. Really, I mean, we're learning the benefits of the PASS framework, which has been a 10-year programme. We've seen substantial increase in our decent home standards, about a 40% increase, which we'll probably never see again. But what's important, of course, is that the flexibility going forward enables us to maintain that. So every sort of 8 to 10 years, we need to revisit our main estates and blocks to make sure we keep those standards going. And obviously, at the moment, the legacy, if you like, of the COVID impact has yet to sort of really be realised in that industry. We're seeing significant redundancies and problems with contractors, etc. So this just gives us a greater degree of flexibility around control going forward, a greater deal of flexibility in going outside of this agreement, which we currently don't have, which enables us to then, as Kieran has alluded to, enter into framework agreements across London so we can deal more with local SMEs and those sort of institutions and help work with them. So yeah, I mean, overall, we think this gives us an absolute right blended approach going forward with our procurement and delivery.
Thanks very much indeed, Dave. Okay, no one else is indicated. So there are 4 recommendations here, 2 for us to note and 2 for us to approve. Can we agree those recommendations, colleagues, which are on pages 143 and 144 of the papers?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, the next report is a Gateway one also. It's procurement strategy approval for lift maintenance, refurbishments and replacement. And this report starts at page 168.
So another report about procuring our services, this time for lifts. I think it's important to say on this one, we've had good performance from our lift providers, both in terms of the ongoing maintenance and replacement of lifts over recent years. I think that's a really different story than if you were to look back into the pre-2010 and earlier, when actually the public perception and the reality in Southwark was that lifts were not always reliable for people, and we've really brought those standards up to make sure people can get into their homes, which of course, particularly for those that are have disabilities, is a crucial thing. So this carries on with a similar framework we have in place to make sure we can continue to provide that high level of service.
Thank you very much indeed, Kieran. Anyone want to comment on this? Okay. Thank you, colleagues. We did have a discussion about this at agenda planning, I know. So should there are 2 recommendations for the Cabinet, 1 and 2, at pages 168. Can we agree those recommendations, please?
Agreed.
And then there's a recommendation for me to delegate authority to the Cabinet Member for Housing, Management and Modernisation to approve the Gateway 2 report for 2 lift maintenance, refurbishment and replacement contracts. I do that. Okay, fantastic. We move on to a report now about the Aylesbury Regeneration Programme and delivery of new council homes on the first development site. This report starts on page 182. And I'd agreed that our dear friend Jean Bartlett from the estate, who's been a stalwart supporter of the regeneration programme and the residents there, could say a few words. Jean, are you around?
Peter, Jean's not available, but I am Charlotte Vinstead, the Chief Executive of the Creation Trust.
Well, Charlotte, it'd be nice to hear from you. Fantastic.
Lovely to see you all. Yes, so Jean's really sorry she can't be here. I'm afraid she's a Team Zoom rather than a Teams lady.
Yeah.
But she's given me permission to read her statement for her. So I'd like to thank the Cabinet for the opportunity to speak tonight at what is another important point in the story of the Aylesbury estate. We think that we've now seen it all. The history of the Aylesbury regeneration has been a real roller coaster, not always a very fast one, but a roller coaster. We've seen everything being tried and tested: land sales, PFI deals, collaborations and development partnerships. Whatever these were called or whatever format they were due to be delivered in, they were never really going to give the residents what they've wanted all along, which is good quality council homes. We'd always been told that this was not an option, so we're always trying to find the next best deal outside of this. And to be honest, however close they were, we always felt that they never quite hit the mark. As a result, they were always open to criticism and fear that the social home commitment would be eroded to a smaller and smaller percentage and end up delivering less for the community and more for the developer. So we're delighted that council homes are now an option and hope that the paper's agreed. There are lots of existing residents who'll be relieved that they can stay on the footprint where their support networks are and near the local facilities they're used to. We also know that although they often moan about the council, the sense of security that being a tenant of the local authority brings with it cannot be underestimated for our long-term tenants. We've also been concerned that resident leaseholders, rather than the investors, are given an affordable way to stay on the footprint, so we're pleased that this will now be an option. And we know that the officers and members would work really hard on this programme in a time of a national emergency, so I'd like to personally thank them for getting the deal done and hope that it's supported. We do, however, in a Jean way, want to reiterate that the message we gave in the last deputation in January. So members and officers, please put everything you can in place to ensure the quality of the build is good enough so that when Aylesbury residents do move, the issues that plagued them for years on the Aylesbury are a thing of the past. No more damp, leaks, pests, heating outages, please. But thank you very much. So that's the statement from Jean Bartlett MBE, who's chair of the Aylesbury TNRA and the vice chair of Creation Trust.
I think you're on mute, Peter.
Unmute, Peter.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlotte, for doing that. We really appreciate the work that you've done for tenants and residents of the estate over so many years as well. We've got a trio of authors of this report. I don't know who to call first, but we'll go in hands up list order. So Kieran, Leo, Johnson, and then Vicky Mills.
Well, firstly, thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to all of the residents who've helped us get to this point with this report, and to the ward councillors as well. I think it's a fantastic step forward for the estate. I won't say much now, but the two things I will say is the one thing we'll come back in the autumn with is a clear framework for residents on the estate to have priority for these homes as they become available, and to work with residents to conclude those. And I think it would be a really good thing to find a way to work with residents to look at the quality of the homes as they're being built as well.
Thanks, Kieran. Leo.
Just to repeat that, thanks to the residents, to Creation and the ward councillors who've put so much into making this the best regeneration it can be for the community there at the Aylesbury. I just wanted to really respond to the question on quality. So we are due to have a report very shortly on the quality inspection regime that is in place at Package A and Package B on the first development site, and I'll very happily share that with everybody as time goes on, because it is an absolutely critical point. I think the original Aylesbury build was rushed, it was aggressively value engineered, and we're dealing with the consequences of that only a few decades later, and we really want these homes to be lasting for many, many generations to the benefit of everybody in the Aylesbury. I just want to add as well that this is, we're short of time, but this is really worth flagging as a pivotal moment in Southwark's council housing history. We pledged after the last election that we wanted to expand and enrich our council estates, and that we do all that we could to try to apply those principles retrospectively, and we're now on course to be able to do that. So it's a really great achievement. I doff my cap to everyone involved, to Matt Derry, Steve, to my cabinet colleagues, past and present, and I hope that when these homes are built, they're going to be transformative for the people who live there.
Thanks, Leo. I'm sure we all echo those wishes. Johnson.
Yeah, I goes without saying, echo everything that's just been said. I'd like to pay attention, pay special mention to everybody at Creation, all of the residents or the community who worked tirelessly over many, many years to be able to get us to the place that we are at, as well. The ward councillors who worked tirelessly to get us to the place that we are at the moment as well. I'm delighted to join cabinet colleagues and to basically highlight how important the Aylesbury is. I think it's certainly the first time I've been involved in a report which has had 3 cabinet members authoring a report. So it doesn't get much much more important than that. And I particularly want to highlight a couple of other things: 581 new council homes, and important to recognise also the specialist housing as well, and the increase from 219 to 617 over the FDS as well. Very much in line with our commitment that we gave last year as an administration to see no net loss of social housing over the course of the Aylesbury regeneration programme. So, really pleased to bring this forward, and as Councillor Williams has said, look forward to the report that we'll be bringing forward in the autumn on ensuring that local people can be able to move and stay on the estate.
Thanks very much indeed, Johnson. And Vicky Mills.
So of course I support the decision that we're making today, and of course it is great news. It has always been our priority to build more council homes during this administration, and to make sure that people have a kind of warm, dry, safe place to call home. And COVID has only exposed the difference between those who do have those things and those who don't. So it's the right decision we make today. This is much more for the benefit of my colleagues. Kind of recommendation 2 is a huge financial commitment, both from the housing revenue accounts, but also a substantial commitment from the general fund capital as well. So I guess I just want people to be clear that this is value for money. This is a good financial investment that we're making today, but we are going to be lining up other financial investments that we want to make in the months and years to come, and we are going to be less and less able to do that. So let's make a good decision today. Let's spend money on something that absolutely is one of the best investments we can make in new homes. But I just think we should be aware of the level of commitment that we're making in recommendation 2.
Thanks very much indeed, Vicky. I think that's a really important point. It's not often actually that we spend £145 million in a report, so we probably should just acknowledge that in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, good to point it out. Okay, any other comments? Fantastic. Okay, right. Well, there are those 5 recommendations there, colleagues, on page 183 of this report, which spend lots of money and bring new council homes to the Aylesbury. Can we agree those?
Agreed.
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 Thank you very much indeed. Okay, moving on. Charlotte, report back, please, to your colleagues and Jean and Creation about the decision.
Yeah, absolutely will. They'll be delighted. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlotte. Okay, let's move on to item 20, 18 St Mary's Road, and together with the properties in item 21 relate to properties which are vacant and which will be sold in order to help us pay for our capital programme. Vicky. Vicky Mills?
She's just messaged Peter to say that her connection's dropped out.
Okay, right.
We can do leisure first if you want.
We could do, okay. All right, let's do that. Let's move to leisure, item 22, which is on supplemental agenda, colleagues. And Rebecca.
Thanks, Peter. you'll forgive me just for giving a bit of the detail here, but I think it's important given the decision that we are going to be taking this afternoon. I first want to thank all of the officers for all of their work over the last few months, engaging in all of the conversations that they have with SLM, working through the full range of options about how we proceed, and for turning around this report so quickly. Free Swim and Gym was obviously one of our most ambitious policies back in 2014, and something of which we're incredibly proud of as a borough. And it's also why in 2018 we sought to go further and commit to making Free Swim and Gym more flexible and to introducing free swimming lessons. When we looked to re-tender the leisure services contract back in 2016, we wanted a partner who shared this ambition and who were able to provide an exemplary service to the borough. However, much has changed in the leisure market since we entered the contract with SLM, and the impact of these changes has only been amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. Although I think it's important to say that discussions about the future of this contract had started well in advance of this arising as an issue. We're obviously now coming to the time when leisure centres are once again allowed to open, and it seems like the best time to reconsider the whole of our leisure services provision at this time. It's not been an easy decision to reach this point, and there is much more work that will need to be done to ensure the smooth transition to a new and hopefully post-COVID way of operating. But this report and the recommendations contained within it are the beginning of the journey to ensure that our leisure centres continue to serve our residents in the way that they want, whilst we as a local authority can lead the way in what an exemplary leisure service looks like. As such, this report sets out proposals for a medium-term financial support package for SLM, which will allow our leisure centres to reopen as soon as possible after the 25th of July and continue to operate until at least March 2021, whilst we consider our options for future provision. Alongside this, our proposal is to begin a full review and evaluation of the options for the future management of all of our leisure centres, including full consideration of how we would be able to insource the service as soon as is practical. We propose bringing this report back to Cabinet in September for final sign-off on our future approach. Finally, I just want to say that in the interest of transparency, and because this has been the result of a huge amount of work and number of conversations over a very lengthy period of time, I'm really keen that overview and scrutiny has the opportunity to interrogate our decision. And as such, I'm proposing that if we agree this report at Cabinet, that the decision should go to overview and scrutiny at the earliest possible opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks very much indeed, Rebecca. It really is important this does go to scrutiny. Ian, it was brought to my attention earlier on today that SLM is a company which is owned in a very convoluted way by a number of other companies, but it all leads back eventually to Martin and Caroline Bell, who are the two shareholders. Now, as the two shareholders, they received dividends in the last 2 years of £15.5 million. Which is a substantial amount of money, I think anyone would agree. And at a time when everyone active is telling us that they can't pay us management contracts and they are effectively holding us to ransom over our leisure contract going forward, I think it's important to know what contribution they really will be making, where a company which apparently has sufficient cash to pay out £15.5 million in dividends to its two shareholders isn't able to offer further financial support. So I know we've always all had concerns about this contract, but I do think these negotiations have to be realistic and open. And I don't think the public should be effectively be paying out dividends of this nature at this particular time. So anyway, Ian, it's one for you and your scrutineers to take forward, almost certainly to interrogate.
Thank you very much, Peter. We're up for the job, don't worry.
Yeah. Okay. I think Vicky Mills had. Oh, had she indicated? I don't know. She's disappeared again. Colleagues, I drew that to your attention so that it's always fascinating when you hear little things like this. Indeed, but the recommendations that we're being asked to agree today don't commit massive sums of money. They commit us to negotiations and acting in good faith and trying to keep things open and get things open. So I hope everyone active will do the same when they come to the negotiating table. Okay, any thoughts or observations from anyone? Okay, silence. So 3 recommendations for the Cabinet to agree on page 20 of supplemental agenda number 2. Can we agree those, please?
Agreed.
Agreed.
And two recommendations for me, which I agree, but I know that the strategic directors were listening to that report and conversation. Okay, fantastic. We move. We're going to have to move back, I think, even without Vicky. Steve Platt, you're here. I say rather plain. Oh, you're there. You're there.
I've just got back on. I don't think you're going to get video, but you're going to hopefully get a voice. Is that
okay?
Right?
Well, brilliant. Well, go with the voice.
So I don't know if are we doing St Mary's Road item.
Yes, please.
Okay, bear with me. I'm on a different system now. So St Mary's Road. Today we are proposing that we dispose of this property and generate a much needed capital receipt for the general fund. This is a building that was used to house some children's services. They have now been rehoused elsewhere and have been provided elsewhere, and we've looked at whether we need to use the building for any other council services, and we have concluded that we do not. We have looked at the option of whether this is a building we could bring into housing use, and I think we've concluded that that is neither affordable nor necessarily sensible because of the kind of type of building that this is. So we're proposing that we dispose of it and help fill the nearly £400 million gap in the capital programme.
Thanks, Vicky. Any comments from anyone? I'm just checking. Nope. Okay. Well, colleagues, can we? There are 3 recommendations on page 197. Can we agree those, please? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. And we stay with reports, new properties rather, and you, Vicky, 23 Irwin Street and 48 Hale Street.
So these are 2 properties that have been in our council housing portfolio, but we are proposing today that we dispose of them. They are properties that have fallen into kind of a level of disrepair, and they would need. We are saying that is uneconomic to kind of bring them back into use, and that the more economic way forward is to dispose of them, these 2 properties, and to generate a capital receipt, this time for the housing revenue account, the kind of capital receipt that we need if we are going to agree to spend, the money that we have just agreed in terms of the Aylesbury estate. I think these decisions are usually very tough for us. We want to hang on to every property, and this is why we only bring these voids forward every now and again. So this is 2 properties. I think it's the first time we've brought properties forward for some time, but we're saying on balance, it is better value to dispose of these 2 and generate a capital receipt which will build other new homes for us.
Okay, I do have someone showing. Kieran.
Just to briefly say, as Vicky said, these are difficult decisions. We fully recognise that there is a need for larger homes in the borough, but actually, on reflection, having really had a very robust discussion in Cabinet and officers looked very hard at this, we think this is the right decision to have the income we needed to deliver more council homes for people who need them in the borough.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, colleagues. There's one recommendation to authorise the head of property to dispose of these properties for a sum that equates to the market value. Can we agree that, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Agreed. Okay, finally, our report is Policy and Resources Strategy, Financial Remit 21-22 and Scene Setting. It's normally a picture of lots of unknowns at this time of year. It's one of even greater unknowns on this occasion, I think, Vicky.
Yes, sorry, and apologies, you've got me at a funny angle. I will try. I think our Wi-Fi is working slightly better. So we have talked a lot over recent weeks and months about the impact of COVID on our finances. We've been absolutely clear that they are large and that the government has not kept its commitment that it would fully fund councils for the impact of COVID. There is a huge additional financial cost to us. There is an even huger amount of lost income. There are many savings that we had hoped to make in this financial year that has simply not been possible for us to do. And we know as well that the challenge of welfare reform and also the challenge of unemployment will mean that it's even more difficult for us to kind of do the things that we want to do, and for residents to kind of have the pounds in the pockets that we need for them to kind of be using in the borough. And equally, they're probably going to be more reliant on our services. So we're left in a very, very big financial challenge. All of the uncertainty that we've talked about in terms of council funding over recent years remain. They have been effectively pushed back a year by this government, but we do not know what a long-term sustainable kind of funding system for local government looks like. Government have failed to do anything other than apply sticking plasters to social care, and we don't know what the solution is going to be long term. They have failed to kind of properly fund our schools, and we're sat on a huge deficit on our dedicated schools grant, and we do not know what role business rates will play in local government funding in the future. So we have a huge difficulty for 21-22, and then we have a kind of longer term kind of precarious kind of financial situation, because it's not clear to us what happens after COVID, even if everything gets back to normal in September, even if we have a really kind of fast recovery, which I don't think any of us are sure is going to happen. In terms of planning for the 21-22 budget, at this stage we are saying if government doesn't come forward with a multi-year settlement, that we are planning to set a one-year budget. And I suppose the key figures that it's worth looking at today is that the budget gap for 21-22 is a huge fan of uncertainty. At the best end, we say the budget gap might be about 12-13 million. And at the worst end, it's just shy of 47 million. And this is, you know, kind of like on a council that's had 10 years of austerity and which has kind of public services that are in desperate need of investment and rebuilding, even before COVID. We are saying that in terms of planning purposes, our best guess at this stage for the budget gap is around £26 million, but to bear in mind that we are already factoring in a council tax rise of 2.99%, and that we are already factoring in some use of reserves. I think at that budget gap we're factoring in about £5 million of reserves. So it's a pretty depressing picture. I think the only things that kind of give me hope is that, you know, over the last 10 years, we have managed to still deliver amazing services. We have had huge ambition, which we have delivered on. You know, it has truly been a decade of delivery here in Southwark. And the attitude here is kind of like, you know, if anybody can, Southwark can. And now that we've done this one thing, what's the next thing that we want to get on and deal with? So that gives me hope. You know, we've got brilliant officers here in Southwark, a kind of brilliant administration, and I'm sure that we will tackle this head on. But it is pretty depressing to be looking at this size of budget gap when we'd kind of felt that we'd ridden out perhaps the toughest years of austerity. I don't know whether Duncan or Rob are on the line and they want to kind of correct me, make me more depressed, make me more hopeful for the challenge that we have in the coming kind of 6 months.
This is Duncan. I'll try and be slightly uplifting, Vicky, but echoing everything that you said. I apologise once again for bringing Cabinet such uncertainty at such a kind of critical time in the year as we move towards a 21-22 budget. I firmly expected after last year that we'd be in a very different place in 21-22, but the last 4 months the whole world has changed, I'm afraid, and that's no longer the case. We're undoubtedly in a worse position than we would otherwise have been. We had a very strong financial year in 1920, and we were poised, I think, to move on to a very progressive programme looking forward. That is no longer the case, I'm afraid. We're looking, as I say, to, as Vicky mentioned, government has plastered over the cracks so far, and actually the longer term maintenance is really left with us to deal with. I really honestly hope we won't get to the worst scenario up at 46 million. That depends on pretty much everything working against us, but the most likely scenario, which is in the region of 26 million, is in reality what we need to plan for, even after the use of reserves and a council tax rise, as Vicky mentioned. So I apologise again for not being able to be more certain here today, but one thing I'm very confident of is that after 10 years of dealing with this kind of pressure, we have the right arrangements and the right people, both at member level and at the officer level, in place to come through the other end. And can I, as I probably always do, remind everyone of the ambition and the extent of our capital programme. It is enormous, and it includes so many jewels, I think, in terms of the services that the council delivers. So one of our big ambitions, I must say, must be to continue as far as we can with that programme, while obviously reviewing it to see what scope there is in there to reprioritise or reconfigure. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Duncan. Vicky?
The other thing that we haven't talked about, and I'm conscious that other councils are talking about this, is that at this stage we are not proposing a kind of in-year or emergency budget. We have huge financial challenges, and if we can start to kind of consider things that could be done in year, we should be doing that. But I think we're of the view that we don't need to do that at this stage, and that there's probably more to be gained to kind of carefully plan for 21-22 rather than bringing forward an emergency budget in September. So that's where we are at the moment. I'm just conscious that other councils are going down a slightly different route.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, and indeed Croydon issuing redundancy notices or consultations on redundancies yesterday, I think. Okay, any comments on this other than kind of a collective sigh and a shrug and a determination to carry on campaigning? I mean, my irritation, massive irritation about this, is that the government has spent untold tens or hundreds of billions of pounds in the last 4 months keeping the economy going. And, you know, one of the keys to delivering our recovery and renewal in London will be the activities of local government. We can't do that and do the work that we need to do if, you know, we don't have the money to do it. And actually, if we're facing a greater financial challenge than we've ever faced in the last decade, I think, Duncan, I'd be right in saying that this is more than we've ever had to find in a single year, almost, of budget cuts, on top of a decade of budget cuts. And it just seems to me, you know, for 6 or 7 billion across the country to keep local government in a solid position where it's not having to look to make cuts as the first course of action, then, you know, that would be such a false economy, I think, for government to do that. So we just have to carry on making the case. And it's something like £1 billion still in London that we are short. And it's indiscriminate. It's both Labour and Tory and Lib Dem councils who are being hit in this way. So, okay. Right, colleagues, there are lots of recommendations, 8 recommendations on this supplemental agenda. Can we agree those recommendations, please?
Agreed.
Agreed. Sets us off to do lots of work going forward on this. Okay, well, that ends the open business this evening. So thank you very much.